Hello and welcome. We're about to dive into a really fascinating puzzle, something that sits right at the heart of doing business globally. How is it that the very same action can be totally fine in one country, but could get you in serious trouble in another? Let's get into it.
I mean, it's a huge paradox, right? In a world that feels more connected than ever, the rule books that businesses have to play by are often wildly, fundamentally different. We're going to break this down by looking at 3 different case studies, where you can really see these differences in action. Okay, first up, the ongoing battle over workers' rights. We're going to look at what happened when both the United States and Australia tried to reform their labor laws around the same time. You'll see their goals were pretty similar, but the results, well, they were worlds apart.
And the contrast is just wow. In the US, you had the Employee Free Choice Act. This was a massive priority for unions. And it just fizzled out. It's still stuck in legislative limbo. Meanwhile, down in Australia, their Fair Work Act sailed through with almost no trouble at all. So what on earth happened? Why did one succeed where the other failed so spectacularly?
Well, the answer in the US isn't some big, dramatic political fight. It's actually what experts call a sub-political path. See, the original promise of labor rights from back in 1935 wasn't defeated in some big national election. Nope. It was slowly, quietly chipped away over decades, mostly through Supreme Court decisions and little legislative tweaks like the Taft-Hartley Act. This completely changed the game, turning unionization from something workers just did into a big contest between labor and management. But in Australia, it's the complete opposite. Labor law isn't some niche topic only lawyers care about. It is front-page, election-deciding stuff. I mean, entire political campaigns are won and lost over industrial relations policies. Just look at the work choices legislation. That single issue totally dominated the national conversation for years. So the American effort really failed because of this unique mix of factors. The whole issue just never really caught fire with the general public, and that quiet atmosphere allowed these big business-funded campaigns to zero in on a few key senators without much of a fight. But the real killer, the thing that really shut it down, was a feature of the political system itself, the Senate's filibuster rule. It's this procedural hurdle that means you need a supermajority, 60 out of 100 votes, to pass anything big. So when they lost just one Senate seat in a special election, that filibuster-proof majority disappeared. And just like that, the bill was dead. All right, let's move on to our second case study. This one gets at an even more basic question. When a company goes broke, who gets stuck with the bill? The answer to that reveals a really deep philosophical divide between countries. So in places like Australia, the UK, and New Zealand, they have this legal idea called insolvent trading. Basically, it's a duty that says if your director and your company is about to go under, you absolutely cannot take on new debts you know you can't pay. And if you do, you could be held personally on the hook to pay them back. This quote really highlights the culture shock. American lawyers are often completely stunned that a rule like this even exists. To them, it feels like it just tramples all over the idea of limited liability. But, and this is the funny part, lawyers from Australia and the UK are just as baffled when they hear that the US doesn't have a rule like this. It just goes to show 2 totally different ways of thinking about how business should work. And the law goes even further. It doesn't just apply to the directors whose names are on the official paperwork. It also goes after what are called shadow directors. This could be a person or even a whole other company that's really the one pulling the strings behind the scenes, telling the board what to do. And that, of course, raises some pretty juicy questions. Could a parent company that has its subsidiary on a really tight leash be held liable for that subsidiary's debts? Or what about a bank that forces a struggling business to follow its orders in exchange for a loan? Under these laws, the answer could absolutely be yes. The thinking behind all this is to solve what you might call the broke gambler problem. Think about it. If a director's own investment in the company is already toast, what's stopping them from taking a crazy long-shot gamble with their creditors' money? If it somehow pays off, they're a hero. If it fails, well, who cares? It wasn't their money anyway. The Australian solution basically makes it their money by putting their own personal assets on the line. So at the end of the day, it all boils down to a clash of philosophies. The Australian system, and others like it, puts protecting creditors first. The suppliers and lenders who are owed money. But the US system, it prioritizes encouraging entrepreneurial risk-taking, essentially accepting that some businesses failing is just the price you pay for innovation. For our last case study, let's jump into the world of e-commerce.
This is where modern technology is forcing regulators to answer all new kinds of questions, and it's revealing these same old legal differences playing out in real time.
I'm sure you've all been here. You see a great price for a flight online, but by the time you actually get to the checkout page, a whole bunch of taxes, resort fees, and service charges have been dripped in. Suddenly, that great price is way higher. This is called drip pricing, and different countries are trying to tackle it in different ways.
Now, while pretty much everyone agrees this is a problem, the legal tools they're using to fix it are all over the map. Australia, for example, just calls it misleading conduct and tackles it with their big, broad consumer law. The UK does something similar, calling it an unfair commercial practice. But the United States is way more fragmented. It regulates industry by industry, so the rules for airlines are totally different from the rules for hotels. Now think about the sharing economy. When something goes wrong on a platform like Uber or Airbnb, say your driver cancels or the apartment you rented doesn't exist, who's on the hook? Is it just the individual user? Or is it the multi-billion-dollar tech company that connected you, set the price, and took your payment? Right now, there are two competing ideas about this. The first view is that the platform is just a passive intermediary, basically a neutral digital bulletin board. If you see it that way, its liability is pretty limited. But the second view, which is getting more and more common, is that the platform is actually an active participant. It controls key parts of the deal, right? So in that case, its legal responsibility should be a whole lot greater. Okay, so after looking at all these examples, what's the big takeaway? Why are the rules so different from place to place? Let's try to pull it all together.
You see, these differences aren't random at all. They're basically baked into the DNA of each country's legal system. It really comes down to four big things. First, the political machinery. Things like that US filibuster that can stop a law dead in its tracks. Second, legal history. All those quiet court decisions over decades that can totally reshape what a law actually means. Third, that national philosophy we saw, that deep, fundamental disagreement about risk versus fairness. And finally, public engagement. Whether an issue becomes this huge national debate, like in Australia, or just stays a niche topic nobody really talks about.
All these deep-seated differences create this incredibly complex and often contradictory map for any business that wants to go global. And it all leads to a huge question for our future.
As business becomes truly borderless, are we going to see these different legal traditions start to merge into some kind of single global standard? Or is the online world just going to end up being a digital reflection of the same old patchwork of local rules, philosophies, and histories that we've always had? It's a fundamental tension, and figuring it out is going to define the next chapter of business all over the world.